These are the words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. If you are devoid of hope, then roll over and disappear quietly. Hope says, man, hey, things will be better, because God has intended for it to be so. You know, at no point will evil and injustice and oppression and all of the negative things have the last word. And yes, there's no question about the reality of evil, of injustice, of suffering. But you know, at the center of this existence is a heart beating with love, that you and I and all of us are incredible. I mean, we really are remarkable things, that we are, as a matter of fact, made for goodness. And it's not just a smart aleck thing to say, it's a fact. Because all of us, even when we have degenerated, know that the wrong isn't what we should be, isn't what we should be doing, that we're fantastic. I mean, we really are amazing. Here ends the reading.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu grew up under apartheid in a South African township, and he experienced all of the privations of segregation. He was able to vote for the first time in a democratic election at the age of 63, an experience which he described as falling in love. He said it was like falling in love. As apartheid ended, Archbishop Tutu presided over the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, and that was a 3-year process during which, among other things, victims of apartheid violence were able to give testimonies about their experience. And that testimony was heard not just by the commission, but also by the perpetrators of the violence, of the human rights violations. And also the perpetrators were able to make confession themselves and ask for forgiveness. Some of those people were granted amnesty as a result of this process, but it wasn't all of them. Less than 2,000 people out of, I think, 7,000 of the perpetrators were granted amnesty. So this is a man whose life made him very well acquainted with evil and ugliness. And yet every time I ever saw the Archbishop speak, he exuded a sense of warmth, humor, love, and cheerfulness. And you could hear some of that in the reading that Francine just gave us, that sense of just lightness. Hey man, hope, you know, you gotta have hope or you should just curl up and go away. This quality of his always intrigued me, because given what he lived through, given what he had witnessed and heard, given what he knew firsthand of human depravity, what fueled this consistent presence of charming kindness? Of course, some of this we can attribute to someone's personality, their innate character, but it's also very much Desmond Tutu's theological convictions and the spiritual practices that he had to strengthen those convictions and to repair them when they were damaged that contributed to his affect. I think all of us would like to strengthen that ability to express joy and cheer and warmth despite what's going on in the world, which is why I thought it would be really worthwhile for us to spend some time with Desmond Tutu at the beginning of Black History Month. He passed away at the end of December 2021, so he is a very recent ancestor. One of the first lovely surprises I discovered upon getting more deeply into the teachings of Archbishop Tutu was that he had a very generous-hearted Christianity. He very explicitly taught that Christian faith is not the only exclusive path to righteousness or to salvation. In fact, he was very close friends with the Dalai Lama, And in speaking to Krista Tippett in an interview for her show on Being, Tutu said, "Do you really think God would say, 'Dalai Lama, you really are a great guy, man. What a shame you're not a Christian'?" I somehow don't think so. I think God is just thrilled because no faith, not even the Christian faith, can ever encompass God or even be able to communicate who God is. Only God can do that. There is so much grace in this and so much real reverence. Tutu acknowledges that God is wholly other, a profound mystery that no one faith or philosophy can define or really comprehend. He doesn't just offer a polite recognition of religious variety, but he actually embraces it. He celebrates it. This openness and maturity is refreshing, and I think it undergirds Archbishop Tutu's warm, generous sense of presence. While so many religious leaders are tight with certainty and self-righteousness, even as they might acknowledge another faith tradition, this is a man who sees God as being thrilled with the wide diversity of how human beings imagine the transcendent. How much more inner peace could we all experience if we took this attitude of humility and inclusivity and applied it to all our thinking and conversations about religious ideas? This was also a politically risky thing for Tutu to say, as the global Anglican communion, which includes Episcopalians in this country, is actually in many locations very conservative, and that includes South Africa. And it has had schisms over diversity and acceptance of many kinds, not just theological, but including the inclusion and acceptance of LGBTQ people in the life and leadership of the church. When asked about that, Desmond Tutu said something else surprising, along the lines of, "We have so much to really do, we have so much that we need to focus on. It's a shame and a waste of time and energy that this issue, to fight about this issue, which is so clearly not an issue to God." Again, he had a real lightness of being in responding to this painful division in the church, which sets a really beautiful example. He doesn't come right out and call the homophobia of the church ridiculous, but it's implied. He has the ability he had the ability to balance a sense of impatience, I would call it holy impatience, with the moral failures of the world, with that sense of indomitable cheerfulness. Telling a story about an Afrikaner theologian who was expelled from his church for his anti-apartheid position, but who later had a highway named for him, Tutu spoke about the old enemies in the battle, now both dead, and he said, "You can imagine them up in heaven kind of rolling around, with laughter." He imagines the afterlife, therefore, as a place of total reconciliation, where all things are made whole, and through joy and a sense of even absurdity about the humans still struggling back in the earth time. It's a really beautiful vision. It's a very universalist vision. Desmond Tutu's radiant smile and frequent laughter come to my mind when I despair of the slowness, hesitancy, and regression of our efforts towards justice in our own country. His inner light came from the deep belief that human beings are not alone in moving the world along. Our work and our human process are not the only forces shaping the future. The 19th century Unitarian minister and abolitionist Theodore Parker wrote that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King popularized that quote, which is often attributed to him, We repeat it a lot in Unitarian Universalist and other progressive circles. Desmond Tutu's belief in a world where the spiritual is real and ever-present, permeating all existence, as he wrote, invites us to remember and to trust that it is not just our human intellectual and organizational and legislative efforts that bend that moral arc towards justice. Tutu knew God as an eternally self-giving one, a unity, and believed that we are supported by God and the ancestors, who are, he wrote, concerned to promote the well-being of those who are bound together with them in the bundle of life. And that's actually one of the definitions of sainthood, is somebody who promises even beyond their death to be bundled together with us, the living, in our struggle of life. So I consider him one of the unofficial saints. The United States of America has never had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission such as was headed by Desmond Tutu in South Africa. But I think and hope that we are in a period of time when we are trying, as a society, to address more squarely, head-on, the legacies of genocide of First Nations peoples and the generational devastation wrought by centuries of slavery. At least some sections of our society are trying to do this, while others are resisting truth-telling and accountability with all their might and main, and also spending billions of dollars in propaganda and political organizing to fight against this truth-telling. Watching this struggle play out in the reactionary banning of critical race theory teaching, and also in book banning and burning, most recently in Tennessee and Texas, we see the opposite of truth and reconciliation. We see attempts to erase history and silence its witnesses. It's heartening to know that one of the banned books, Mouse by Art Spiegelman, which is a graphic novel about the Holocaust, has shot up to #1 on the bestseller list on Amazon. Oh, you didn't know? I'm so glad. Yeah. Phew, #1, and people are sending it into libraries and to people in Tennessee and putting it in the hands of teachers. So that's wonderful, good resistance. It's also important to remember that people are books. We ourselves are all books, living stories. And telling our stories has a tremendous amount of power to reach across divides and move that moral arc of the universe toward understanding and justice, as, again, others are trying to push it back. This was an insight shared by Desmond Tutu in describing how being able to just tell their stories had the ability to rehabilitate and heal people who had suffered terribly under the system of apartheid. In one such example he shared with Krista Tippett, he said, "We had a young man, a black young man, who had been blinded by police action in his township. And he came to tell his story. When he finished, one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission panel asked him, 'Hey, how do you feel?' And a broad smile broke over his face. And he was still blind, but he said, 'You've given me back my eyes.' I found in preparing this sermon that I did not want to bring it to an end because I wanted to keep sharing these stories with you and more, and bringing you more and more tidbits from the life and the work and teachings of Desmond Tutu. He is such a healing and encouraging person to be around. His laughter and joyful sense of the eternity of God's love, infectious. when we are tempted to take refuge in sophistication and ultra-rationalism, to close ourselves off to wonder because the world is so painful and we are trying to protect ourselves from carrying too much or from hoping too much. I hope that we will invite into our presence such ancestors as the Archbishop, who, despite his own firsthand acquaintance with the sorrows and moral failures that haunt us, maintained a steadfast sense of joy, of beauty, and of faith that God's love will always have the last word.